A photon never arrives halfway. It does not spread its energy out gently over an area. It arrives all at once, like a tiny tap on a sensor in your eye, or a small packet of warmth landing on your skin. Even if the photon had been spread across a wide region of space moments before, the instant it is detected in one location. The entire ripple collapses into a single, definite absorption event. This duality, spreading like a wave, arriving like a particle, is not something scientists invented to confuse anyone. It is something they discovered when they finally learned to look closely enough. Light sometimes behaves in ways that only waves should behave, and at other times it behaves exactly like something small and indivisible. This is not because light switches personalities or cannot decide what it wants to be. It is because the concepts of wave and particle, born from everyday experience, are simply not adequate to describe something as fundamental as a photon. A photon is neither a wave nor a particle in the classical sense. It is something more delicate, something that shares qualities with both while belonging entirely to neither. To keep this idea gentle, you might imagine a piece of music drifting through a room. The sound fills the space, spreading out like a wave. You can hear it from many places at once. Yet the energy that reaches your ears arrives in tiny bursts, activating the cells in your inner ear one packet at a time. The music behaves like a wave in one sense, and like individual pulses in another. It is not a perfect analogy, but it captures the feeling of something that is both spread out and discrete at the same time. Another soft metaphor is to picture a cloud drifting across a calm sky. The cloud has no firm edges. It spreads, stretches, and shifts. But if a raindrop forms within that cloud and falls, the raindrop is a single concentrated event. The cloud-like behavior before the raindrop forms and the particle-like behavior of the raindrop once it appears are connected, even though they seem so different. In the same way, a photon can spread like a cloud and arrive like a raindrop, without the two behaviors ever being in conflict. In quantum physics, this dual nature is entirely natural. Everything at the smallest scales behaves this way, not just photons. Electrons, atoms, and even molecules can spread out like waves, and then arrive in single, discrete moments. The universe seems to speak a quiet, consistent language at those scales, even if that language feels foreign to human intuition. What makes photons particularly magical is that their wave-like and particle-like behaviors are so easy to demonstrate. Shine light through a narrow gap, and you see diffraction, waves spreading out. Shine light onto a metal surface and measure the energy it gives off, and you see discrete particles delivering their energy in fixed amounts. You can view photons from either perspective, and both perspectives reveal something true about their nature. The key is understanding that the word wave describes how a photon travels, while the word particle describes how a photon interacts. These are not competing descriptions, they are complementary ones. The wave behavior tells you how the photon moves through space, spreading, interfering, forming patterns. The particle behavior tells you how the photon gives its energy to matter, always in one complete unit, never in fractions. If you imagine walking through a soft mist, you feel enveloped by something that has no clear boundaries. Yet when a single drop of dew lands on your hand, it arrives as one distinct droplet. The mist and the droplet are connected, part of the same phenomenon, just experienced differently. A photon shares this dual quality. The spreading is real. The single delivery is real. Both are expressions of the same underlying behavior. The soothing part of all this is that there is no expectation for it to feel intuitive. Even the scientists who discovered these behaviors were deeply puzzled at first. But over time, they learn to accept that nature is allowed to be subtler than our everyday experiences suggest. The quantum world does not need to mimic the classical world. It simply needs to be consistent with itself, and it is. So when you picture a photon moving through space, let it be a ripple, calm, expanding, elegant. And when you imagine that same photon being absorbed, let it be a tiny, perfect tap of energy arriving in a single moment. Both images are correct. Both are true. Both are part of the gentle mystery of light. The wave-particle puzzle, when viewed slowly and without strain, becomes less of a riddle and more of an invitation. It asks you to loosen your intuition, to allow nature to behave in ways that are more fluid and delicate than the solid world you know. It encourages a kind of calm openness, a willingness to hold two ideas together without forcing them into a single, simplistic shape. Light can spread like a wave. Light can arrive like a particle. And in that duality lies one of the most beautiful truths in physics, that the universe, at its smallest scales, is far softer, stranger, and more graceful than the everyday world would ever let you guess. When you picture a photon, it can be tempting to imagine it as a tiny bead or a miniature fleck of glowing dust drifting through space. Something small, self-contained and tidy. But a photon is not a compact little object with a neat outline. It is something far softer and less confined. It is disturbance in a field, and that disturbance can spread out over a surprisingly wide region while still remaining a single, indivisible quantum of light. This idea can feel almost contradictory at first. How can something spread out and still count as one thing? How can it be present in many places at once, yet always arrive whole? To make sense of it, imagine a quiet room with a candle burning in one corner. The smell of the candle slowly fills the air. It does not stay in one spot. It drifts, spreading through the room in a gentle, invisible cloud. Yet even though the scent has spread, it does not break into little pieces with separate identities. It remains a single presence, permeating the space softly and continuously. A photon behaves in a somewhat analogous way. When it travels, it does not remain confined to a single, pinpoint location. Instead, it spreads out, becoming a kind of shimmering possibility that extends through a region of space. It is not that the photon splits into parts or divides itself across space like a handful of sand scattered on the ground. It is that its presence becomes distributed. It is a pattern, not a particle in the everyday sense. It is a gentle cloud of probability, a shimmering suggestion of where it might be detected. This is where probability comes into the picture, though not in a mathematical way that demands symbols or equations. Think of it instead as a kind of soft anticipation. This spread of a photon is not a physical smear but a story of possibilities, each point in space carrying its own quiet chance of being the place where the photon reveals itself. The wider the spread, the more locations are included in this story. Yet the photon itself is still one entity, not a collection of smaller ones. It may help to imagine a gentle fog rolling across a field at dawn. You might say the fog is everywhere in that space, but you would still think of it as one fog, not many. A photon, too, can extend across space without multiplying into separate pieces. It remains singular, even in its spread. And then comes the intriguing part. When a photon finally interacts with something, your eye, a leaf, a mirror, it arrives as a whole. It does not deliver half its energy here and half somewhere else. It does not tap 3 sensors in your eye and declare the job done. Instead, it collapses all of its possibilities into one definite event, one place, one moment, one complete transfer of energy. The way it spreads out is not a division. It is a kind of quiet searching. It is the universe offering a range of potential locations for the photon to complete its journey. And when the moment finally arrives, when the photon is absorbed, when its energy slips into the atom or the molecule waiting to receive it, all of that spread collapses down to a single point. Not because the photon has snapped back together, but because the act of absorption completes the story. Imagine receiving a letter that could have been delivered to any number of addresses. For days it might drift through a postal network, its ultimate destination not yet decided. But when it reaches your mailbox, it arrives as one whole letter, not fragments scattered across several houses. Its journey may have been uncertain, but its arrival is definite. The photon works in a similar way. It travels in a state of possibilities, but it lands as a singular event. This behavior can feel mysterious, especially because nothing in your daily experience spreads and collapses in the same way. A cup of water does not spread across a table and then leap into a single droplet. A piece of fruit does not scatter into vapor and then reappear whole somewhere else. But photons, being fundamental quanta of energy, live in a world where presence is fluid and detection is exact. If you want a softer picture, imagine throwing a pebble into a perfectly calm lake. The ripples that form spread outward gracefully. They do not break into separate bodies of water. They are one pattern stretching across the surface. Now imagine that this ripple travels across the entire lake. When it finally reaches the far shore, it delivers all its energy in a single moment, a tap, a soft arrival, before fading entirely. This is how a photon spreads and arrives. The ripple carries the possibility of interaction across a wide space, but the actual event occurs in one specific place. This is why photons can interfere with themselves in experiments, yet always deliver their energy in a single whole quantum when detected. They can act as waves during their journey, and as discrete particles when they meet an object capable of absorbing them. These are not contradictory behaviors. They are simply two expressions of the same underlying nature. You can think of the wave-like behavior as an unfolding, a poetic exploration of space. The photon stretches out, touching many places in a gentle, probabilistic way. But the particle-like behavior is the conclusion. It is the moment the photon gives up its energy, ending its existence as light, and beginning its influence in some other form, perhaps as warmth, perhaps as a chemical reaction, perhaps as a tiny electrical signal in your eye. The photon's ability to spread and remain whole at the same time reveals something profound about the quantum world. On this level, reality is not made of little objects flying around like tiny marbles. It is made of events, of possibilities, of patterns in fields that arise and vanish with seamless grace. A photon is not a miniature bead travelling in a straight line. It is a story written in probabilities, one that unfolds across space until the final sentence is written in a single place. This may feel abstract, but it is also beautifully serene. There is no chaos in a photon spread, no frantic scattering, no confusion, just a quiet expansion and an equally quiet conclusion. Everything about it follows the natural rhythm of the field it inhabits. The next time you see light reflecting off a window or shining softly through a curtain, you can picture the photons arriving not as tiny pellets, but as delicate ripples completing their long journey. They have spread across space, searched the landscape of possibilities, and finally found their moment of interaction. They arrive whole because that is the only way they ever exist, as complete quanta of energy, born in motion travelling in patterns and ending their story in a single gentle touch. In this way, a photon spread is not a contradiction. It is a quiet demonstration of nature's ability to be fluid and definite at the same time. A photon can reach across a room and yet appear in a single point. It can be many possibilities and yet one event. It can be a ripple and a particle, a presence and a moment, all without ever being made of parts, all while staying whole. When a photon begins its journey, it is simply a tiny pulse of energy, drifting through the electromagnetic field, gliding forward with no weight and no hesitation. But eventually, almost inevitably, it will meet matter. It might brush against a leaf, slip into your eye, bounce from the surface of a lake, or sink into the dark fibres of a carpet. And what happens in that moment, when this massless, delicate ripple meets the solid world, reveals some of the strangest and most beautiful behaviour in physics. One of the simplest things that can happen is absorption. When a photon reaches an atom or a molecule and its energy matches just the right amount that an electron inside can accept, the photon disappears and its energy becomes part of that atom. It is a quiet handoff, like passing a note from one person to another. The photon does not bounce or split. It simply ends its existence as light and begins a new chapter as energy inside matter. This is how your skin warms in sunlight, how plants power photosynthesis, and how your eyes sense even the faintest glimmer. Absorption is a gentle exchange, seamless and final. Another possibility is emission, the reverse of absorption. When an electron in an atom relaxes to a lower energy level, it releases the extra energy it no longer needs. That release forms a new photon. You can imagine this as a tiny sigh of energy leaving the atom, drifting away as a pulse of light. The universe is full of these quiet releases, inside stars, inside glowing embers, inside fireflies. Photons are constantly being created and absorbed everywhere, a steady cycle of energy moving through the world. Reflection, however, introduces a different kind of interaction. When a photon approaches a reflective surface, like a calm lake or a polished piece of metal, it can be bounced away. But even this bouncing is not the solid, mechanical rebound of two objects hitting each other. The photon is absorbed and then re-emitted by the electrons in the surface almost instantly, sent off in a new direction. To the photon, the change in direction feels smooth and immediate. To you it looks like a crisp reflection. A mirror is nothing more than a surface where many atoms work together to return photons in a coherent, orderly way, letting you see your face in polished glass, or watch the sky shimmer on the surface of water. Refraction, light bending as it travels through materials like glass or water, adds another layer of quiet complexity. When light enters a new material, its path changes. Not because the photon slows down in the sense of a car pushing through mud, but because the pattern of absorption and re-emission inside the material nudges the photon's direction. Imagine walking through a crowd where people guide you slightly left or right without stopping you. You still move forward, but your path shifts gently in response to their subtle cues. A photon entering glass experiences a similar collective influence from the electrons inside the material. The path bends gracefully, giving rise to lenses, rainbows, and the way a straw in a glass of water appears bent. There is nothing abrupt about it. It is a gentle steering, almost like a whispered suggestion guiding the photon's way. Transparency, which can feel like a magical property, emerges from the same behavior. A material is transparent when its electrons do not prefer to absorb the energy carried by visible photons. If the energy of the incoming photon does not match any of the electron transitions available, the photon passes through instead of being absorbed. It becomes like a guest who arrives at a party where no one is expecting them. The atoms quietly let them slip through without interruption. This is why clear glass, water, and certain crystals allow light to pass almost untouched. Their electrons are simply not interested in the energy that visible photons bring. On the other hand, materials that appear opaque do absorb visible light. Their electrons readily take in the photon's energy or scatter it in many directions, preventing it from passing through. When you look at a wooden table, a wall, or your own hand, you're seeing materials whose electrons welcome the energy of the photons that arrive. They absorb some of the light and reflect or scatter the rest in ways that create the colors and textures you see. Scattering in particular is one of the most enchanting ways photons meet matter. You can picture scattering as a gentle nudge that changes the photon's direction. This nudge can happen in air molecules, water droplets, dust, or the faint particles floating in a sunbeam. When light encounters these tiny particles, it is deflected and sent off on a new path. Some photons scatter more easily than others. Shorter wavelength light, the kind that appears blue to your eyes, scatters more readily in the atmosphere, which is why the daytime sky glows with such a soft, expansive blue. At sunset, when the sunlight travels through more of the atmosphere, the blue and green photons are scattered away before reaching you, leaving behind the longer, warmer wavelengths. That is why the setting sun paints the horizon in shades of red and gold. Even the whiteness of clouds is a story of countless scatterings. Clouds are made of droplets large enough to scatter all wavelengths of visible light fairly evenly. The result is a gentle blending of colours that appears white to your eyes, like a soft blanket stretched across the sky. Then there are materials that shimmer or sparkle, because they scatter light in different directions. Rough surfaces, powdered chalk, beach sand, all reflect light in a somewhat chaotic pattern, causing them to appear matte or softly bright. The light that reaches your eyes from these materials is the result of photons being nudged again and again, softly redirected until they find their way to you. What makes all these interactions so strange and beautiful is that the photon is not a tiny object being pushed around. It is a disturbance in a field, responding to the structure of matter in ways that are delicate and precise. Every reflection, every refraction, every scattering is a conversation between the photon and the electrons in the material, a quiet negotiation that determines the photon's fate. This gentle negotiation is happening constantly around you. When you look at a cup of tea, photons reflect from its surface to reveal its shape. When you gaze through a window, photons pass through because the glass allows them to. When you shield your eyes from bright light, you are blocking photons that would otherwise be absorbed by your retina and translated into electrical signals, giving you the sense of vision. Every moment you spend seeing, feeling warmth, or moving through the world is shaped by these quiet interactions. It is soothing to realize that nothing chaotic is happening underneath these everyday experiences. There is no frantic battle between photons and matter. Instead, there is a soft choreography of absorption and release, of gentle nudges and graceful redirections. Photons meet matter in ways that are elegant, predictable, and full of subtlety. And so, the next time sunlight filters softly through curtains or dances over the surface of a river, you can imagine the countless photons involved, some being absorbed, some passing through, some scattering like tiny wanderers nudged off course. Each one is part of a calm, intricate dialogue between energy and matter. Each one is a reminder of how quietly and beautifully the universe works, even in its smallest details. The moment a photon reaches your eyes, an extraordinary sequence of events begins, one so quiet, so delicate, and yet so central to your experience of the world that it almost feels miraculous. Light drifts across space with no mass and no intention, but once a photon meets the surface of your eye, everything changes. That tiny pulse of energy begins a chain reaction that ultimately becomes sight, colour, shape, and meaning. To understand how you see a photon, imagine first the entrance of your eye. Light slips through the clear surface, glides through the lens, and settles onto the thin light-sensitive sheet at the back, known as the retina. The retina is an extraordinary structure, packed with millions of cells designed to respond to light. These cells wait patiently in the darkness inside your eye, alert for the arrival of even a single photon. Your eyes contain two types of light-detecting cells, rods and cones. Cones are responsible for colour vision. They allow you to see reds, greens and blues, and they work best in bright daylight. They are the artists of your vision, interpreting the world in rich, vivid hues. Rods, however, are the quiet night watchers. They cannot distinguish colour, but they are astonishingly sensitive. In very dark conditions, rods can respond to single photons. One tiny pulse of light, born perhaps millions of years ago in the heart of a distant star, can slip into your eye, strike a rod cell, and be detected. When a photon reaches one of these cells, it is absorbed by a molecule tucked neatly inside. That molecule changes shape in response to the photon's energy, like a lock turning when the right key is used. This shape change triggers a cascade of chemical reactions, tiny signals that flow from molecule to molecule until they reach the base of the cell. There, the chemical changes are converted into an electrical impulse. The photon, which began its life as a ripple in the electromagnetic field, has now become a message. This electrical signal travels along a network of interconnected cells within the retina. Each cell refines the message slightly, enhancing edges, adjusting contrasts, quieting noise. Only after this careful processing does the signal begin its journey along the optic nerve toward the brain. What is remarkable is that you never notice any of this. You're not aware of the photons striking your retina or the chemical reactions unfolding. All you know is that you can see. When the signal finally reaches the visual cortex at the back of your brain, an entirely new transformation begins. The brain does not simply play back an image the way a camera displays a photograph. Instead, it interprets. It guesses. It fills in details. It makes decisions about what matters and what does not. Much of what you believe you see is a combination of actual signals from photons and the brain's best guesses about what should be there. Occasionally the brain guesses incorrectly, which is how optical illusions manage to fool it. In a way, the brain is like an overly enthusiastic storyteller, very good at filling in gaps, occasionally creative in ways you did not ask for, and rarely interested in admitting uncertainty. This guessing is not a flaw, it is part of what makes vision so rich. When light is scarce, or when objects move quickly, or when the world presents only fragments of information, the brain uses memory and context to complete the picture. You might see a shadow and recognize it as a familiar object before you consciously analyze it. You might glimpse movement out of the corner of your eye and know instantly that someone is approaching. All of this interpretation begins with the simple act of absorbing photons. What makes this even more beautiful is that your eyes are not passive windows. They constantly adjust, modifying their sensitivity to match the world around you. In bright sunlight, your pupils shrink to protect the retina. In darkness, they widen, inviting more photons in. The rods become more active, ready to detect even the faintest glimmer. This dynamic adjustment allows you to experience everything from the brightness of midday to the soft glow of starlight. In both extremes, photons guide your perception. Consider for a moment how light interacts with your surroundings before reaching your eyes. It bounces from walls, from leaves, from water, from the surfaces of everyday objects. Each surface reflects, absorbs, or scatters photons in its own way. When you look at a red apple, what you actually see are the photons the apple did not absorb. Those photons reach your eye carrying the precise energy that your cone cells interpret as red. Your brain then constructs the idea of the apple, its shape, texture, depth, and colour from these incoming signals. The apple itself never sends you a picture. It simply redirects photons, and you assemble the rest. This interplay of light and perception happens constantly, even when you are unaware of it. When you close your eyes, the visual world does not vanish completely. There may be faint flashes or drifting shapes. These are signals from cells inside the retina firing randomly or responding to internal changes. The brain, ever eager to explain things, sometimes interprets these signals as patterns. It does this because it prefers a story to silence. Even in darkness, your neurons murmur among themselves, keeping the machinery of sight ready for the next photon. It is also worth remembering that all the scenes you experience, the colours of sunrise, the glow of city lights, the shimmer of waves, the quiet pale of a winter morning, are shaped by photons that began their journeys far from you. Some come from the sun, crossing nearly 100 million miles before reaching Earth. Others originate in lamps, screens, candles, or reflections bouncing from nearby surfaces. From every direction, light arrives, and your eyes patiently translate it into vision. There is a soft humility in the way your eyes work. They do not demand powerful beams of light or dramatic displays. They can begin with a single photon, one quantum of energy, one tiny ripple in the electromagnetic field. That is enough to start the cascade that leads to perception, enough to let you detect the faintest star in the night sky or the smallest movement beside you. Vision becomes even more remarkable when you remember that the world you see is not a perfect reproduction of reality. It is a carefully crafted interpretation. The brain emphasizes some details and ignores others. It blends information from both eyes to create depth. It relies on experience to recognize shapes. At times, it invents patterns that are not really there. But at the heart of this interpretation, anchoring it firmly to the outside world, are photons. They are the messengers that deliver the raw material of sight. So the next time you open your eyes and take in the quiet details of your surroundings, you can imagine the invisible journey unfolding. Photons drifting through the electromagnetic field. Cells waiting patiently in the retina. Molecules changing shape. Electrical signals racing along nerves. And the brain weaving all of it into a coherent, meaningful world. In that sense, every moment of vision is a partnership between light and the mind, a dialogue between the outside and the inside, a gentle collaboration that begins with a single photon. Imagine, just for a moment, drifting into a dream where you can slip into the path of a photon. Not becoming the photon, of course, because a photon is far too simple for that. No mass, no parts, nothing for you to merge with. But imagine floating beside it, travelling alongside its motion the way you might walk beside a friend on a quiet evening. You're not the photon, but you are close enough to sense its world, close enough to let your imagination rest in its rhythm. A photon is born in motion. The instant it comes into existence, it moves at the speed of light. There is no pause, no moment of hesitation, no gentle acceleration as if it is deciding how fast to go. Its entire existence is a journey outward, and so, when you drift into this imagining, you find yourself moving with it at a pace that no object with mass could ever achieve. There is no wind, no friction, no sense of rushing. Instead, there is a kind of perfect stillness wrapped around perfect motion, a paradox that feels strangely peaceful. From this vantage point, time behaves differently, not in a dramatic science fiction kind of way, but in the quiet, profound sense that the familiar rules of clocks and seconds no longer apply. When something with mass travels close to the speed of light, time slows for it relative to the world around it. The closer it gets, the more time stretches out. If it could ever reach the speed of light, time would stop entirely. For a photon, which travels exactly at that speed, time does not pass at all. Its entire existence, from the moment it is created to the moment it is absorbed, happens without duration from its own perspective. This does not mean a photon is conscious or aware. It does not possess a viewpoint or a sense of passage. But in your gentle imagining, this timelessness becomes a kind of meditation. You can picture yourself floating beside a photon as it leaves the surface of the sun. To the photon, nothing separates its beginning from its end. The journey that takes 8 minutes from the perspective of Earth, or millions of years for photons released deep inside a star's core, would feel like a single moment, a single breath, if a photon could feel at all. To you, drifting alongside it in this mental picture, the journey feels both instantaneous and beautifully extended. You can imagine the sun shrinking behind you, the space between planets sweeping past, the darkness expanding in every direction. But at the same time, you feel no sense of acceleration or strain. The universe slides around you without resistance. It is like gliding across a perfectly smooth sea, where the distance between waves unfolds effortlessly. As you travel farther, something curious happens. The distances between stars, which seem vast and almost unimaginable, when seen from a stationary point, begin to feel softer and more connected. The light years between suns compress in perception, because you are moving at the cosmic speed limit. The separation between places turns into something that feels less like miles and more like a gentle flow of scenery. You might picture drifting past the orbit of Jupiter, then Saturn, then leaving the familiar space of the solar system entirely. The warmth of the sun fades behind you, becoming a distant glow. Ahead lies the deep quiet of interstellar space, where stars shine like scattered embers. This darkness is not empty. It is rich with invisible fields, with drifting dust, with particles and forces that fill the universe, even when you cannot see them. As you glide through this cosmic quiet, you sense how the rules around you differ from the rules you know. In ordinary life, distance is something you cross by moving from one place to another over time. But here, alongside a photon, time has slipped away. The journey itself becomes a kind of single moment stretched out like a dream. There is movement, but no ticking. Travel, but no waiting. You might find yourself approaching a distant star. The light from that star flows outward in all directions, just as the light from your starting point once did. The space around you feels woven with ripples of energy, some soft and gentle, others sharp and bright. You drift through them effortlessly, sensing their presence without disturbance. They are other photons on their own journeys, each one carrying energy from one corner of the universe to another. If you continue drifting in this imaginative state, you may find the distance between galaxies folding into something like a quiet path. The Milky Way transforms from an immense spiral to a graceful swirl beneath you. Another galaxy appears like a ghostly island, floating in a sea of dark. Yet through all this vastness, your sense of motion remains peaceful. There is no sense of rushing. The speed does not feel fast. It simply feels like the natural state of this strange, massless companion you're following. Now imagine approaching the end of the journey, wherever that may be. Perhaps the photon is heading toward the leaf of a plant, or the sensor of a telescope, or the surface of a distant world.